Speaking to you from beautiful Philadelphia, an age-old question: should we write likable characters? And I'm going to use Game of Thrones as an example, book 1 of Game of Thrones. In order to write compelling fiction, we need the reader to be interested in what happens to at least one of the characters, usually the protagonist. So what happens is, how do we make the reader care about what happens to the protagonist or what happens to a number of characters in the story? Let's look at a setup that works so well that it's used very often, and that is where you have the hero and the villain. The hero is the protagonist. Usually the reader takes on their point of view and experiences the story from their perspective, and then you have the bad guy, the villain. What is happening psychologically to the reader in this kind of story? When they're first introduced to the story, first technique, the protagonist is introduced at the beginning of the story, and this causes the reader to start occupying that space. They're taken into the story, and whatever happens in the story, they will feel as if they are living that story. They'll feel more like they are actually living that story if they step in to the protagonist's point of view. Now, in these stories, the hero's behavior is always redeemable. If Clark Kent is clumsy, it's redeemable because it only adds to his disguise, Superman incognito. If a hero lies, it's a very innocent lie used to keep someone from finding out something that could cause them great harm. So the hero is always behaves very well, and the villain, there is no ambiguity, always behaves in a way that demeans the villain, makes them seem like an individual that we can root against instead of for. In my using Game of Thrones as an example, first I'm only going to talk about book 1 because that is the only one that I've read. I'll do my best not to include any spoilers, but if you haven't already read the book or watched the shows, season 1 or book 1, go ahead and do that before watching this video, just so that you can enjoy the great surprises that happen in book 1. When you're writing a fictional story about a character, here is one thing to keep in mind. When you're making a character likable, there is something that happens. When a character behaves in admirable ways, readers like that. They like to see that in a character. They like to identify with that character, and it makes them care about what happens to that character. Another thing to keep in mind, usually the characters that you introduce at the beginning of the story are going to enjoy the benefit of the reader wanting to step into those characters' shoes. So when we ask ourselves, do we need to write likable characters? One thing I keep in mind is, do we want the readers to care about what happens in the story? That's more to the point of what this question is about. Because if we write a story where it's all a bunch of crooks and liars and cheats and all of that, then we don't really care. We're like, they could all go to hell for all we care. And it gets to a point where it doesn't really matter and the story isn't exciting. But if we connect with one of the characters, then the story, then we care about what happens, then the spills and the changes of circumstance are exciting to us. Let's look how it was done in Book 1 of Game of Thrones. At the beginning of the story, it's mostly from the Stark family point of view, and they're admirable characters. They're people we like. They treat each other well. They care about each other. Their interests in life are ones that we like, and if we were going to be characters in that story, we'd want to be them, and so there's an underlying thing that happens in fiction that when a protagonist is first introduced, are they going to be under the protective unwritten rule that they really should never be put in harm's way because they're protagonist, or are they going to, no matter what happens in that story, is there always going to be that point at which if they die they will be brought back to life? And if the reader suspects this in the fiction they're reading, it will be a little bit less exciting because we know that in the end it's going to work out for them. What happens in the Game of Thrones is, right off the bat, the protagonists suffer a blow that for many chapters afterwards we hope they will recover from, but it just doesn't happen. So one of the big strategies of Book 1 is to let the reader know that in this story, any protagonist, anyone you care about, they are not going to be within that protective contract that the protagonist should win in the end. Does Game of Thrones have heroes and villains? And ultimately I have to say no, that there's something much more dynamic going on in this style of storytelling. I know for me it has been a great learning experience to monitor my own inner reactions to Game of Thrones as I watched it. Who did I care about? Who was I rooting for? Who did I care what happened to them? And who did I want good things to happen to, and who did I want bad things? Who did I want to get punished or retributed? And it was very helpful for me to look at what was happening. That's what made the story suspenseful. The bottom line is that if you don't want to stick strictly to the model of hero and villain, if you want to introduce ambiguity, if you want to play back and forth with the fact that your characters are fallible human beings and they can have good qualities and bad qualities, just like every individual on the earth, then it's important to anticipate how to keep the reader caring about your characters. Some of the characters are clearly villain-like, like Joffrey. As far as I know, he's a villain through and through. I haven't seen much as far as redeeming qualities in him yet. Then you have Dany Targaryen. She, to me, could seem very much like the hero. She is very likable through and through. Each chapter is written very skillfully in that there is a different protagonist for each chapter. So at the beginning of a chapter, we may end up occupying the shoes of Sansa, and in another one we can occupy the shoes of Jon Snow. And for that chapter, we're pretty much have to, if it's very ambiguous, if it's very unclear who the heroes and villains are in Game of Thrones, why do we care? Why is it compelling? For one thing, there are all the protagonists. It's very clearly written that there are a number of protagonists because they are the characters whose point of view we see each chapter, each story from. So in one chapter, the way it is written is that we're seeing the story through the eyes of Jon Snow, what he is going through. And if we get to know other characters, it's only through his eyes. And then in another chapter, we are seeing the story from Sansa's point of view and what she hears and what she goes through. And we mostly only know Joffrey through her point of view. So there are definite protagonists. There are definite characters set up for us to care about what happens to them. This is mostly my opinion in effective fiction writing strategy. It never hurts to show a villain with a good side, with redeeming qualities. And in many cases, we writers can, by showing the good side of a villain, it actually can make the story more exciting, and it can make it seem more real, because those characters are more three-dimensional. They're not just cardboard cutouts. They have different sides, and they're more believable. And being more believable, we get more scared by the scary parts and more happy when the victory is won. Now, if you're reluctant to show a weak side, a fallible side of your heroes, and worried that it will make people lose interest in them, keep this in mind. When you show the weak side of a character, the fact is that every human is imperfect, and so if you have a character who works really hard but then gets really drunk and can't find his way home, a lot of the times we see that human has a weak side, and because in the depths of our own hearts we know that we're not perfect, we can identify with them more, we can care more about them. There's one thing happening in the Game of Thrones that really makes this whole hero-villain scenario on a whole different level, and that is the team effect. Now, there's something that we humans as social animals have, is where how we feel about who. A lot of the times we have a team. It can be your family, it could be, people in an organization that you're in, your school or work, and we feel like we are part of that team, and as long we are being admirable and likable if we're treating people in that group well, and then we can turn around and do horrific things to people outside of that group, and we don't feel the same way as we would if we treated someone who we consider within our team the same way. And let's look at like a sports team. If you're rooting for one team, within that team they're supporting each other, they've got each other's back, they're all working to help each other, and now if you had a person on a team turn around and block one of their teammates, that would be dysfunctional. That would not be admirable. But if they block someone from the other team, that's admirable. That's not only not dislikable, but likable. So let's look at the movie Bonnie and Clyde. Now, these are crooks. These are robbers. The way the film is introduced is that they're introduced first, so they are the protagonist, and the way they treat each other within their team, they're cordial, they're considerate, they got each other's back, they're helping each other, they're working together. And so the police force and the victims at the bank, they're the bad guys because they're on the other team. So the way Bonnie and Clyde treat the other team does not make us lose interest in them as the protagonists, because this is a psychological effect. This is the team effect, and it's part of how we have evolved as social animals. Because if we were warring tribes, firing bows and arrows and catapults at each other. And now this was a regular part of the human psychology. A good guy and a bad guy had all to do with the team perspective. This effect happens to viewers reading a book or watching a film. If you have a character who behaves well within the team, that is likable. If you have a character who goes out and burns down the house, as long as it is the adversary's house, that is likable. But if you have a character burn down their mother's house, not likable. The same behavior could cause us to root for or root against certain characters in the story depending on who's in what's team. So if someone within a team stabs someone outside of the team, that us readers, that a lot of the time can cause us to cheer them on and root for them. But if they stab someone within their team, that can cause us to decide to root against that character. The team effect, the way the Lannisters, the Lannisters, they work together as a team, and they're somewhat dysfunctional, and the way that they are dysfunctional with each other affects how much I like them and get into their characters. Now, if you read the book, you can see very clearly that Tyrion Lannister is the only Lannister who is a protagonist, whose shoes we occupy when it's one of his chapters. And as far as the dysfunction in his team, within his family, he usually receives the short end of the stick. So we sympathize with him even more and care even more of him because he's the victim of his inner team dysfunction. And at the beginning of book 1, the Lannisters and the Starks were still on the same team. They were not warring teams at the beginning. So when an event happened that made that team break apart, it made a villain and a hero, in that one group within that team betrayed the other group in that team, and in such a way so that the reader decided who to root for and who to root against. On the initial read, it really grabbed me, a very compelling story, and I wondered, because it was full of ambiguity. I never really was sure who the good guy or bad guy was in the course of the story, and yet I cared very much about what happened, and only in going back can I admire the very well-crafted, so that the protagonists in the story, we always care very deeply about what happens to the protagonists in the story. Another thing done in Game of Thrones that I noticed is that you have a character who starts out as one of the good guys but very gradually turns into one of the villains. And this really creates a lot of ambiguous feelings for the part of the reader. Should we root for them? Should we start rooting against them? And it's so gradual. And then at the same time, you have ones that are kind of introduced as one of the bad guys who very gradually can turn into one of the heroes. So because this can be so much like real life, it pulls us into the story even more. To great effect, all the characters, their weak sides, become very well known to the reader. And so the next time that you watch one of the episodes or read one of the chapters, ask yourself, when one of the characters, the protagonist or antagonist, is shown in a bad light, are there also redeeming qualities? Are there things that because if you show a character in bad light and then also show a redeeming quality, the fact that Sansa, she's at the beginning of the story, her interests seem almost trivial compared to the brutal reality of her station in life. But throughout the story, she shows a certain courage that is very redeeming, and this can cause us to like our characters even more. Even look at a character like Hodar. He's mentally retarded, and yet he's very faithful. You have Viserys Targaryen and Joffrey. These are two antagonists. They are never written as protagonists. We never see the story through their perspective. They do a lot of terrible things to other people, and they are never shown with redeeming qualities. And on top of being on top of being problems for everyone else in the story, they also show qualities of weakness. They're both big crybabies, and the irony of that is that both of them are psychopathic when it comes to not being able to understand how they affect those around them, and yet they're the first ones to whine and cry if things are not just perfect for each themselves. We don't see the story from their point of view, and we root against them. Tyrion Lannister is the perfect anti-hero. The way he's introduced to the story, he belongs to the family that have betrayed the other family. He's presented as the person that everyone around him looks down on him, does not look up to him. He is not a leader. He is not. He basically is presented as definitely not the hero type, but the antithesis of a hero type. And yet the way he behaves throughout the story is exactly the way we hope we would behave if we were in his shoes. Jon Snow, completely good guy. Not much ambiguity there. He's a bastard child, but in this, from our perspective of the 2000s, that isn't something that causes us to look down on him the way people in the medieval ages would look down on people. So he is definitely not much ambiguity there. He's in the good guy camp. Cersei Lannister, when the Stark family and the Lannister family were still part of the same team, she is one of the betrayers of that team. Definitely readers would want to root against her. She not a protagonist. We never see the story from her point of view, and she torments and downgrades the lives of people within her power, and so she's very much in villain territory, but also the writer spent a lot of time making it very clear why she does what she does. She's very afraid. She's in a very tenuous position. She's in a position of a lot of power where that power she could be knocked off the king of the hill at any point. So she's still acting in a very human way. She's trying to hold on to her power and keep herself safe in a situation that could mean life or death for her. So she is totally acting like a villain, but it is shown very much why she does what she does. Jorah Mormont, very loyal, a great team member, great team player, one of the best, very admirable. But when we hear what others, apparently there's something out there about how he's a sleeper agent or a spy. So even though whenever we see what he does and he says as being just a great team player, someone anyone would want to have on their team, we wonder, is he going to be a betrayer at a critical point? Now, the characters that are on the king the King's Council. This is a lot of fun because they all are despicable, power-grabbing, backstabbing players, and yet they always do things that turn out to it can be beneficial. Very ambiguous territory. We know that they're all scoundrels. Often they would be the first to admit it. The reason it can be so unclear whether we should root for or against the members on those on the King's Council is that they never seem to be in danger. We don't ever need to worry about whether they're going to get killed or if they're going to rise to power. They are just they're there to add to the excitement of the story. So they don't need to be clearly, they don't need to behave in ways so that we root for them or against them. They just behave in ways where we're never unsure what they're going to do, and they're sort of like the wild cards. We're not sure if they're going to make things worse for those we're rooting for or better. So I could cite all the characters. I could probably make this a 2-hour tutorial, but if you feel like it, go ahead. The characters I didn't mention, put them down and describe to me. Are they very much the protagonist? Are they good guys? How does George Martin, the author of Game of Thrones, effectively use these tools to compel us in his ambiguous story? Thanks for watching. I hope that this video and Game of Thrones inspires you to go out and play a game of fiction yourself, make up your own fantastic reality and have adventures. If you want to get me back, please hit the like button, subscribe, leave a comment, and tell a friend. And please visit my website, solimation.com, where you can see in episode form bizarre alternate reality fiction. And I hope that your writing and imagining goes well, and have a good day.